Maria Rodriguez pushed her cleaning cart down the empty hallway of the Grand Metropolitan Concert Hall. It was past midnight, and her shift was almost over. The wheels squeaked softly against the polished marble floor, a sound she'd grown used to over the past 15 years. She knew every inch of this building, every corner, every seat, every scratch on the wooden stage. Most people would find this work boring. Wake up at 5 in the morning, clean until 2 in the afternoon, go home, sleep, and repeat. But Maria had a secret that made these long nights bearable. After everyone left, after the musicians packed up their instruments and the managers locked their offices, she would stand on that stage. And she would sing. Tonight was no different. She finished mopping the lobby, wiped down the railings, and emptied the last trash bin. Then she walked to the main auditorium, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The stage lights were off, but the emergency exit signs cast a soft glow across the empty seats. 2,000 seats, all vacant, all hers. She climbed the stage steps and stood at the center, right where the spotlight usually fell during performances. She closed her eyes and began to sing. Her voice filled the space, bouncing off the high ceiling and wrapping around the velvet chairs. She sang an old song from her childhood in Mexico, one her grandmother used to hum while making tortillas. The melody was sweet and sad at the same time. This had been her routine for years. No one knew about it, not her co-workers, not her neighbors, not even her daughter. It was her private joy, her way of keeping a part of herself alive that the world had forced her to bury. Maria had always loved singing. As a young girl in her village, she sang at weddings, festivals, and church gatherings. People would stop what they were doing to listen. Her mother used to say she had a gift from God. Back then, Maria dreamed of becoming a real singer, performing on stages just like this one. But life had other plans. She got married young, had a baby. Her husband left when their daughter was only 2. Maria had to work, had to survive, had to put food on the table. There was no time for dreams, no money for singing lessons, no space for anything except making it through another day. She came to America when her daughter was 5, hoping for a better life. The journey was hard, the adjustment even harder. She took whatever work she could find, cleaning houses, washing dishes, working in factories. Eventually, she landed this job at the concert hall. It paid enough to cover rent and put her daughter through school. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent her days cleaning a place where others lived out the exact dream she'd abandoned. She wiped down seats where wealthy people sat in expensive clothes, sipping champagne during intermission. She polished the stage where famous singers performed to thunderous applause. And when they all went home, she stood in their place and sang to the shadows. Her daughter, Elena, was everything to her. Smart, ambitious, studying business at the state university. Elena didn't know about her mother's singing. Maria had never told her about those dreams from long ago. What was the point? That part of her life was over. She was a cleaning woman now, nothing more. And that was okay. She'd made peace with it. Or so she told herself. One Thursday afternoon, Maria was sorting through the mail that had been left in the staff room. Bills, mostly. A notice about a schedule change. A birthday card for one of the security guards. Then she saw an envelope that didn't belong. It was thick, cream-colored, with fancy gold lettering. Her name was printed on the front in elegant script. She opened it carefully, confused. Inside was an invitation to the Winter Gala, the concert hall's biggest event of the year. It was a charity fundraiser where the richest people in the city gathered to donate money and enjoy an evening of world-class performances. Tickets cost $500 each. Maria had cleaned up after dozens of these galas, but she'd never been invited to attend one. She read the invitation 3 times, sure it was a mistake. It had to be. People like her didn't get invited to galas. They served drinks at them. They collected dirty plates after them. They certainly didn't sit at the tables wearing fancy dresses. She showed it to her supervisor, a tired woman named Betty, who'd worked there even longer than Maria. Betty looked at it and shrugged. Must be some kind of computer error. They probably mixed up the lists. Just throw it away. Maria nodded and put the invitation in her bag. She meant to throw it away. Really, she did. But something stopped her. That night, she took it out and looked at it again. The date was 3 weeks away. The dress code was formal. There would be a 4-course dinner and performances by internationally acclaimed artists. She imagined herself there for just a moment, wearing a beautiful dress, sitting at a table, watching the performances from the audience instead of cleaning up afterwards. It was ridiculous, impossible. But the image stayed with her. When Elena came home that weekend to do laundry and raid the refrigerator, she found the invitation on the kitchen table. Her eyes went wide. "Mom, you got invited to the winter gala? That's amazing!" Maria waved her hand dismissively. "It's a mistake, mija. They didn't mean to send it to me." "But your name is on it," Elena said, studying the envelope, "and it came to our address. Maybe it's not a mistake. Maybe someone wanted to recognize all your hard work." "Nobody recognizes cleaning ladies," Maria said with a sad smile. "We're invisible." Elena sat down across from her mother, still holding the invitation. "You should go." "Are you crazy? I can't go to something like that." "I wouldn't fit in. I don't have the right clothes. I wouldn't know how to act." "So what? You work there. You have just as much right to be there as anyone else." Elena's voice was firm, insistent. "When's the last time you did something just for yourself? Just for fun?" Maria couldn't answer that. She couldn't remember. "Look," Elena continued, "even if it is a mistake, so what? The worst that can happen is they turn you away at the door. But what if they don't? What if you get to have one magical evening? Don't you deserve that?" Maria looked at her daughter's eager face and felt something stir inside her chest. It was hope, fragile and frightening. "I don't have anything to wear to a place like that." "Then we'll find something," Elena said, grinning now. "Come on, Mom, let's do this. Let's get you to this gala." Over the next 2 weeks, Elena dragged her mother to thrift stores and consignment shops. They tried on dozens of dresses, too tight, too loose, too young, too old. Maria felt silly, playing dress-up like a little girl. But Elena was determined, and her enthusiasm was contagious. Finally, they found it. A simple navy blue gown with long sleeves and a flowing skirt. It was elegant without being flashy, sophisticated without trying too hard. When Maria looked at herself in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. "You look beautiful," Elena whispered, and Maria felt tears sting her eyes. The night of the gala arrived faster than she expected. Maria stood in her small apartment, wearing the blue dress and a pair of borrowed heels. Her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was insane. She should stay home. She should take off this dress and forget the whole thing. But Elena was there, adjusting her mother's hair, spraying perfume, telling her how proud she was. And before Maria could change her mind, they were in a taxi heading toward the concert hall, toward the place where she'd spent 15 years invisible. Tonight, she would walk through the front door as a guest. The taxi pulled up to the front entrance, and Maria's stomach dropped. She'd only ever used the service entrance in the back, the one near the dumpsters where delivery trucks came and went. The front entrance was a different world entirely. Red carpet stretched from the curb to the doors. Photographers clustered on either side, their cameras flashing. A line of expensive cars waited to drop off guests dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Maria made in a month. Elena squeezed her hand. "You've got this, Mom. Just walk in like you belong there, because you do." Maria wanted to believe her. She paid the driver with shaking hands and stepped out of the taxi. The cool evening air hit her face, and suddenly she was walking toward those doors. The same doors she'd cleaned the glass on just yesterday morning. Now she was walking through them as a guest. Inside, the lobby took her breath away. She'd seen it 1,000 times, but never like this. Never with hundreds of well-dressed people filling the space with laughter and conversation. The chandeliers blazed with light, reflecting off jewelry and champagne glasses. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters circulated with trays of appetizers that looked like tiny works of art. Maria felt like she'd stepped into a movie. This couldn't be real. She didn't belong here. Any moment now, someone would recognize her. They'd point and whisper. They'd ask her why she wasn't wearing her uniform, why she wasn't pushing her cleaning cart. But no one looked at her that way. People smiled politely as they passed. A waiter offered her a glass of champagne. She took it, even though she rarely drank, just to have something to hold on to. Elena had already gone back home, wanting her mother to have this experience on her own. Maria was alone in this sea of strangers. She checked the invitation again, finding her table number, table 28. She made her way through the crowd, trying not to trip in the borrowed heels. The main auditorium doors were open, and people were beginning to find their seats. Maria walked in and almost gasped. She'd cleaned this room countless times, but she'd never seen it from this angle. From the audience's perspective, it was magnificent. The stage gleamed under soft lighting. The curtains were a deep burgundy. The ceiling seemed to stretch up forever. Table 28 was near the back, which was fine with Maria. The less attention, the better. She found her seat and sat down carefully, smoothing her dress. The table was set with more forks and spoons than she'd ever seen in one place. She had no idea which ones to use for what. 3 other people were already seated at her table. An older couple who looked like they'd been attending these events for decades, and a younger man in an expensive suit talking on his phone. They nodded politely at Maria when she sat down, then went back to their conversations. Maria opened her program and studied it, grateful for something to focus on. The evening would include dinner, followed by several performances. A string quartet would play first, then a famous cellist, and finally a soprano would sing an aria from an Italian opera. Maria recognized the pieces listed. She'd listened to recordings of all of them during her late-night singing sessions. Dinner began, and Maria tried to follow what others were doing with their silverware. The food was unlike anything she'd ever tasted. Tiny portions of things she couldn't identify, each course more elaborate than the last. She ate slowly, watching everything, trying to absorb it all. Around her, conversations flowed. People talked about their businesses, their vacation homes, their children's private schools. They knew each other, had history together. Maria stayed quiet, invisible again even while sitting right there. But this time, being invisible felt safer. She could observe without being observed. The performances began after dinner. The string quartet was beautiful, playing with a precision that made Maria's chest ache. Then the cellist took the stage, a renowned musician Maria had only ever heard on recordings. Listening to him live in person was completely different. She could feel the music vibrating through her body. But then something unexpected happened. The master of ceremonies, a distinguished man in an elegant tuxedo, walked onto the stage looking worried. He held a microphone and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I have some unfortunate news. Our soprano for this evening, the incredibly talented Madame Castellano, has fallen ill and cannot perform. We've been trying to find a replacement all evening, but on such short notice it's proven impossible." A murmur rippled through the audience. People looked disappointed. The aria was supposed to be the highlight of the evening. The master of ceremonies continued, and Maria could hear the desperation in his voice. "I know this is highly unusual, but if there's anyone here tonight who has classical vocal training and would be willing to perform, we would be incredibly grateful. The accompanist is prepared, and we have the sheet music ready." He tried to make it sound light, almost like a joke, but the silence that followed was awkward. People shifted in their seats. A few nervous laughs echoed through the room. No one raised their hand. No one stood up. Maria felt her heart start to pound. The aria listed in the program was Casta Diva. She knew that piece. She'd sung it hundreds of times alone on that stage. She knew every note, every phrase, every breath. But she couldn't. Could she? She looked at the stage, the place where she'd spent so many secret hours. She thought about all those nights singing to empty seats, pretending she was performing for a real audience. She thought about her 16-year-old self in Mexico, fearless and full of dreams. Her hands gripped the table. This was crazy. She wasn't a professional. She was a cleaning woman who sang in the dark. These people would laugh at her, or worse, they'd recognize her. They'd realize she was the woman who scrubbed their toilets and mopped their floors. But another voice whispered in her head. When would she ever get another chance like this? When would she ever stand on a stage in front of an audience with a pianist ready to play, with people actually willing to listen? Elena's words came back to her. When's the last time you did something just for yourself? Maria's chair scraped against the floor as she stood up. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. Every head near her turned. The master of ceremonies looked in her direction, surprise crossing his face. She knew him. His name was Robert, and he'd worked at the concert hall for 8 years. He'd walked past her 1,000 times, usually talking on his phone or rushing to a meeting. He'd never really looked at her before. Now he was looking at her with confusion and maybe a hint of recognition. But he was desperate, and a volunteer was a volunteer. He gestured for her to come forward. Maria started walking toward the stage. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The aisle seemed to stretch on forever. People watched her pass, whispering to each other. Who was she? Where did she come from? Could she actually sing? She could feel their doubt like a physical weight. She saw a woman at a nearby table lean over to her companion and smirk. She heard someone whisper, "This should be interesting," in a tone that meant they expected it to be terrible. Maria climbed the steps to the stage, the same steps she'd climbed thousands of times before. But this time, the house lights were on. 2,000 people were watching. The pianist, a young man named David, who she'd helped once when he'd dropped his music, looked at her with kind but uncertain eyes. "What would you like to sing?" he asked quietly, probably ready to suggest something simple. Maria's voice came out stronger than she expected. "Casta Diva? From Norma?" His eyebrows shot up. That aria was notoriously difficult. Even trained sopranos struggled with it. He studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly and pulled out the sheet music. Maria walked to the center of the stage and turned to face the audience. 2,000 faces stared back at her. She could see everything from up here. The doubt, the curiosity, the impatience. She saw the woman who'd smirked. She saw the older couple from her table looking confused. She saw Robert standing off to the side, probably praying this wouldn't be a disaster. The piano introduction began. The familiar notes floated through the air. Maria closed her eyes and took a deep breath, drawing air into her lungs the way she'd taught herself from library books and YouTube videos. This was it, her one moment, her one chance. She opened her mouth and sang. The first note that came out of Maria's mouth silenced the room instantly. It wasn't just a sound. It was pure, crystalline, and powerful. It filled every corner of the concert hall with an almost otherworldly beauty. The note soared upward, perfectly controlled, hitting the pitch with absolute precision. It hung in the air like something you could reach out and touch. The change in the audience was immediate. The whispers stopped. Forks that had been scraping against plates went still. Programs that people had been fanning themselves with froze mid-air. Every single person in that room turned their full attention to the stage. Maria kept her eyes closed. She couldn't look at them. Not yet. If she saw their faces, saw their reactions, she might lose her nerve. So instead she focused on the music, on the words she'd sung so many times in the darkness. The aria was a prayer, sung by a priestess calling on the moon goddess. It required incredible breath control and the ability to sustain long, flowing phrases. Maria had practiced this piece for years, teaching herself by listening to recordings over and over, matching her voice to the great singers she admired. Now, all that practice was pouring out of her. Her voice moved through the difficult passages with unexpected ease. The high notes rang out clear and strong. The soft parts were tender and intimate. She wasn't just singing the notes. She was living them, feeling every word, every emotion. In the third row, a wealthy businessman named Gregory, who'd come reluctantly to the gala, sat forward in his seat. He'd been checking his phone under the table, bored by the whole evening. But now his phone lay forgotten in his lap. His mouth hung slightly open. At table 12, an older woman named Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. She'd been attending these galas for 30 years and had heard countless performers. But something about this voice was different, raw and honest in a way that professional singers sometimes weren't. She reached for her husband's hand. Near the back, the young man in the expensive suit who'd been at Maria's table had stopped texting. He was staring at the stage with an expression of complete disbelief. He leaned over to the older couple next to him. "Who is she?" he whispered. They shook their heads. Nobody knew. Maria reached the most challenging part of the aria. It required her to climb to a high C and sustain it while adding a delicate vibrato, then descend through a series of intricate runs. This was the moment where even trained sopranos sometimes struggled. The audience seemed to hold their breath collectively. Maria opened her eyes for just a moment. She saw the sea of faces below her, all watching with rapt attention. Instead of making her nervous, something shifted inside her. These weren't just wealthy strangers anymore. They were people who were actually listening to her, really listening. For the first time in 15 years, she wasn't invisible. She closed her eyes again and sang the high note. It came out effortlessly, floating above the piano accompaniment like a bird in flight. The vibrato was warm and controlled, exactly as it should be. Then she descended through the runs with perfect accuracy, each note clear and distinct. The pianist, David, was having his own moment of shock. He'd been skeptical when she'd chosen this piece, worried it would be a disaster. But now his hands moved across the keys with renewed energy, inspired by what he was hearing. He'd accompanied famous singers before, but this was something special. This was a voice that had real soul. Maria continued through the aria, her confidence growing with each phrase. She forgot about her borrowed dress and uncomfortable shoes. She forgot that she'd mopped this stage yesterday. She forgot about being a cleaning woman, about being invisible, about being someone who didn't belong. In this moment, she was simply a singer, and she was home. The aria built toward its climax. Maria's voice swelled with emotion, filling the concert hall with sound that seemed to make the chandeliers tremble. She held nothing back now. All the years of secret singing, all the dreams she'd buried, all the passion she'd kept hidden. It all came pouring out through her voice. In the lighting booth above, a technician named Luis, who'd worked with Maria for 5 years, stood with his hand frozen on the control board. He recognized her now. That was Maria from housekeeping. Maria who always said good morning with a shy smile. Maria who sometimes hummed while she worked, though she always stopped when people came near. He'd had no idea. No idea at all. Robert, the master of ceremonies, stood in the wings watching with his mouth open. He was trying to remember if he'd ever really looked at this woman before. He'd seen her around the building for years, hadn't he? But he'd never actually seen her. Not really. And now she was up there saving his event, performing an aria that his expensive soprano had backed out of, and doing it better than he could have imagined. The aria was reaching its conclusion. Maria prepared for the final high note, the one that would end the piece. It was a sustained B-flat that had to be held for several beats, then released with perfect control. She took a breath, deeper than all the others. Then she sang it. The note was pure and strong, carrying across the room with incredible power. It seemed to vibrate in people's chests, to resonate in their bones. Maria held it steady, her breath control flawless, her pitch unwavering. The seconds stretched out. 4 beats, 5, 6. The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. 2,000 people sat motionless, mesmerized by this single sustained note. Some had tears running down their faces and didn't even realize it. Others gripped their armrests, transported by the sheer beauty of what they were hearing. Finally, Maria released the note. It faded gently, dissolving into silence like morning mist. The piano played its final chord. Then there was nothing but quiet. Maria opened her eyes fully now, looking out at the audience. They were all staring at her. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The silence stretched on, and Maria felt a flutter of panic. Had she done something wrong? Were they upset? Then, from somewhere in the third row, a single person began to clap. It was Gregory, the businessman who'd been bored earlier. His hands came together slowly at first, then faster. The sound echoed in the silence. Then another person joined in, and another. Within seconds, it was like a wave crashing over the room. Everyone was on their feet, applauding. The sound was thunderous, overwhelming. It rolled over Maria in a physical wave. People weren't just clapping politely. They were cheering, shouting. Some were crying openly. The woman who'd smirked earlier had her hand over her mouth, shaking her head in amazement. The older couple from Maria's table were both standing, applauding with tears streaming down their faces. Maria stood frozen at the center of the stage, trembling. She'd imagined this moment so many times in her secret practices, but the reality was so much more than she'd ever dreamed. The applause went on, showing no signs of stopping. In the audience, people were turning to each other, asking the same question over and over. Who is she? Who is that woman? Nobody seemed to know. She wasn't listed in the program. She wasn't anyone they recognized from the opera world. She'd appeared from nowhere and delivered a performance that many of them would remember for the rest of their lives. Near the back of the auditorium, a man was already pulling out his phone. He'd recorded the whole thing on video. Within hours, that video would be uploaded to the internet. Within days, it would be viewed by millions. But Maria didn't know that yet. All she knew was this moment, standing on the stage as people applauded for her. Really applauded. For her voice, for her gift, for her. Robert rushed onto the stage, his face glowing. He took Maria's hand and raised it high, presenting her to the audience. The applause somehow grew even louder. Maria saw Elena burst through the back doors of the auditorium, having snuck back in after hearing the commotion. Her daughter's face was radiant with pride and joy, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clapped harder than anyone. Maria finally allowed herself to smile, a real, genuine smile that came from somewhere deep inside. She bowed, the way she'd seen performers do it. The audience roared its approval. As she straightened up and looked out over the crowd once more, she realized something profound had shifted. She would never be invisible again. The applause finally began to fade, but Maria couldn't leave the stage. People were rushing toward her from all directions. Robert tried to maintain some order, but it was useless. Within moments, Maria was surrounded by dozens of people, all talking at once. "Where did you train?" a woman in a sparkling gold dress asked urgently. "Are you performing anywhere else this season?" a man in glasses wanted to know. Can I get your contact information? Someone else called out. Maria felt dizzy. She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. What could she say? That she'd trained herself by watching YouTube videos in her tiny apartment? That her stage was usually empty except for her and the shadows? That until tonight she'd been wearing a uniform and pushing a mop? Elena fought her way through the crowd and grabbed her mother's arm. "Give her some space, please," she said firmly, though her voice shook with emotion. She guided Maria toward the side of the stage, but people followed, still calling out questions. Then a voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone, please, let her breathe." The crowd parted, and a tall man with silver hair stepped forward. Maria recognized him immediately. Maestro Chen, the conductor of the city symphony. She'd seen him dozens of times, always from a distance, always while she was emptying trash cans or polishing brass railings. He was a legend in the classical music world, known for discovering new talent. He looked at Maria with intense, searching eyes. "That was extraordinary," he said quietly. "I've been conducting for 40 years, and I've rarely heard anything like that." He paused. "Tell me, where have you performed before?" Maria's throat felt tight. This was the moment. The moment when she'd have to admit the truth, and everyone would realize she was just a cleaning woman who'd gotten lucky. But Elena squeezed her hand, and Maria found her voice. "Nowhere," she said simply. "I've never performed before. Not in public." The maestro's eyebrows rose. "Never? But your technique, your breath control, the way you interpreted the piece, that doesn't come from nowhere." "I taught myself," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I work here. I clean the building. After everyone leaves at night, I practice on this stage. I've been doing it for years." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People looked at each other in surprise. The woman in the gold dress tilted her head, studying Maria more closely. "You're the cleaning woman? I've seen you here during the day." Maria nodded, bracing herself for disappointment, for the moment when these people would lose interest. But it didn't come. Instead, Maestro Chen smiled. It was a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Remarkable," he said. "Absolutely remarkable." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "I want you to audition for us, for the symphony. Can you come to the concert hall next Tuesday at 10 in the morning?" Maria stared at the card in his hand, unable to move. Elena took it for her. "She'll be there," her daughter said firmly. More people pressed forward with cards, with questions, with requests. A woman who ran a local opera company wanted her to audition. A vocal coach offered free lessons. A talent agent asked if she had representation. It was overwhelming, like being caught in a whirlwind. Finally, security helped clear the area. Maria and Elena escaped to a quiet hallway, both of them shaking. They looked at each other and suddenly burst into laughter. Nervous, disbelieving laughter that echoed off the walls. "Mom," Elena said, when she could finally speak. "Did that really just happen?" Maria leaned against the wall, her legs weak. "I don't know, I think so." They stayed there for a few minutes, trying to process everything. Then Elena pulled out her phone. "Oh my God," she said, her eyes going wide. "Mom, you need to see this." She held up her phone. Someone had recorded Maria's performance and posted it online. In just the past hour, it had already been viewed thousands of times. The comments were pouring in. This gave me chills. "Who is this woman? She's incredible. I've never heard Casta Diva sung with so much emotion. This is what real talent looks like." More videos were being posted. Different angles, different moments. Some showed Maria's performance, others captured the audience's reaction, the standing ovation, the tears on people's faces. It was spreading fast, being shared and reshared. Maria's phone, which had been in her small purse, started buzzing. Then it didn't stop. Text messages, calls from numbers she didn't recognize, notifications from social media accounts she barely used. Elena helped her silence it. "This is crazy," Maria whispered. "This is completely crazy." They decided to leave through the back entrance, the one Maria normally used. As they walked down the familiar hallway, Maria saw Luis, the lighting technician, standing near the stage door. He looked at her with something like awe. "Maria," he said. "I had no idea. All these years working together, and I had no idea you could sing like that." "Nobody did," Maria said softly. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Why didn't you ever try to perform?" Maria thought about how to answer that. How could she explain years of feeling invisible, of believing her dreams were too big, too impossible? How could she describe the weight of responsibility, of bills to pay and a daughter to raise, that had seemed to crush everything else? "I was scared," she finally said, "and I thought nobody would care about someone like me." Luis shook his head. "Maria, everybody in that room cared tonight. Everybody." Outside, the night air felt cool and fresh. Maria took a deep breath, still wearing her borrowed dress and uncomfortable shoes. A taxi pulled up and they climbed in. As they drove through the city streets, Maria looked out the window at the lights, at the people going about their Thursday night, completely unaware that her entire life had just changed. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a number with a New York area code. Elena answered it, spoke for a few minutes, then hung up with a stunned expression. "That was a producer from a morning talk show," she said. "They want you to come on their program. They're offering to fly you to New York." Maria couldn't even respond. It was too much. All of it was too much. When they got home to their small apartment, Elena made tea while Maria collapsed onto the couch. She kicked off the borrowed heels and wiggled her sore toes. Everything felt surreal, like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. Her phone kept buzzing. More calls, more messages, more offers, a recording contract, an invitation to perform at a music festival, a request for an interview. It didn't stop. Elena finally turned the phone off completely. They sat together on the couch, drinking tea in silence. Outside the window, the city continued its usual rhythm. But inside this small apartment, everything had shifted. "What are you going to do?" Elena asked eventually. Maria looked at her daughter. At 21, Elena was so smart, so confident, so ready to take on the world. Maria had worked herself to exhaustion to give her daughter opportunities, to make sure Elena could chase her dreams without the same barriers Maria had faced. And now, impossibly, Maria had her own opportunity. After 15 years of cleaning stages, she'd finally stood on one as a performer. After years of singing to empty rooms, people had actually listened, and they wanted more. "I don't know," Maria admitted. "This morning I was worried about whether I could afford new work shoes. Tonight people are offering me recording contracts. I don't know how to process any of this." Elena set down her tea and took her mother's hand. "You're going to that audition with Maestro Chen on Tuesday. That's the first step. Everything else we'll figure out together." Maria nodded slowly. Tuesday, an audition with the symphony. Just days ago, that would have seemed as impossible as flying to the moon. But she'd just sung in front of 2,000 people. She'd just received a standing ovation from an audience that included some of the most important people in the city's classical music scene. Maybe impossible wasn't as permanent as she'd thought. She looked around their small apartment. The worn furniture, the faded curtains, the water stain on the ceiling they'd never been able to fix. This had been her entire world for so long. A safe, small world where she knew exactly who she was and what was expected of her. Tomorrow, she was supposed to show up for her regular cleaning shift at the concert hall. She was supposed to mop floors and empty trash and dust seats. She was supposed to be invisible again, but something told her that after tonight, invisible wasn't an option anymore. The video was out there, spreading across the internet. Her voice was reaching people she'd never meet, in places she'd never been. She couldn't take it back. She couldn't unsing that aria. And deep down, in a place she'd kept locked away for 15 years, Maria realized she didn't want to. Maria didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in her mind. The walk to the stage, the first note, the silence that fell over the room, the applause that seemed to go on forever. Every few minutes, she'd convince herself it had all been a dream. Then she'd look at Elena sleeping on the couch, clutching the business cards they'd collected, and know it was real. At 5 in the morning, her alarm went off. Her usual time to get ready for work. She turned it off and sat on the edge of her bed, uncertain. Should she go to work? Should she call in sick? What was she supposed to do? She decided to go. Whatever happened next, she still had bills to pay. She still needed this job. She got dressed in her uniform, the same one she'd worn 1,000 times before, and headed to the concert hall. The moment she walked through the employee entrance, she knew something was different. The security guard, old Mr. Patterson, who usually just waved her through, stood up from his desk. "Maria," he said, his face breaking into a huge smile. "I saw the video. My granddaughter sent it to me last night. That was you? That was really you?" Maria nodded, feeling her cheeks flush. "It was me." "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," he said. "My wife watched it 3 times. She cried every time." Maria thanked him and continued inside, but it didn't stop there. Every person she passed had something to say. The other cleaners gathered around her, talking all at once. Luis came running down from the lighting booth to congratulate her again. Even Betty, her supervisor who never got excited about anything, pulled her aside. "I don't know what's going to happen," Betty said quietly, "but I want you to know I'm proud of you. You've got something special, Maria. Don't let it slip away." By 9 o'clock, Maria hadn't cleaned anything. She'd been stopped every few feet by someone who wanted to talk about the performance. Then Robert, the master of ceremonies, found her in the hallway. "Maria, can you come to the director's office? He'd like to speak with you." Her heart sank. This was it. She was probably going to be fired for crashing the gala, for pretending to be someone she wasn't. She followed Robert upstairs to the administrative offices, places she'd only been to empty trash cans. The director, Mr. Harrison, sat behind a massive desk in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows. He was a stern-looking man in his 60s, who Maria had maybe seen 5 times in 15 years. He gestured for her to sit. "Maria," he began, and she braced herself. "I owe you an apology." That wasn't what she'd expected. She looked up, confused. "You've worked here for 15 years, he continued, "and I never knew your name until yesterday. I never knew anything about you except that you cleaned well and showed up on time. That's my failure, not yours." He leaned forward. "Last night, you saved our gala. You gave a performance that people will be talking about for years. And you did it with grace and courage." Maria didn't know what to say. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap. "I understand Maestro Chen has offered you an audition," Mr. Harrison said. "I want you to know that regardless of what happens, you'll always have a place here. But Maria, if that audition goes well, if opportunities come from this, I hope you'll take them. Talent like yours shouldn't be hidden away." Tuesday morning arrived too quickly. Elena came with her to the audition, holding her hand in the taxi. They arrived at the concert hall's main entrance, and this time Maria walked through those doors, knowing she belonged there. Maestro Chen was waiting in the main auditorium with several other people. The symphony's board members, Maria realized. They were all there to hear her sing. Her stomach twisted with nerves. "Whenever you're ready," Maestro Chen said kindly. Maria stood on the stage, the same stage where everything had changed. She sang 3 pieces that morning: an aria from Mozart, a Spanish art song, and finally, at the maestro's request, she sang Casta Diva again. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then Maestro Chen turned to the board members. They whispered among themselves for a moment before nodding. "Maria," the maestro said, "we'd like to offer you a position as a guest soloist with the symphony. It's a paid position that includes full voice training with our best coaches. You'll perform in several concerts this season, and if things go well, we can discuss something more permanent." Maria's knees went weak. Elena grabbed her arm to steady her. "Yes," Maria managed to say. "Yes, I accept." The next few months were a whirlwind. Maria still worked at the concert hall, but now only part-time. The rest of her days were filled with voice lessons, rehearsals, and practice. A vocal coach named Helen worked with her 3 times a week, helping her refine techniques she'd taught herself and correcting small habits. "You have natural instincts that some singers train for years to develop," Helen told her. "But we need to make sure you're singing in a way that won't damage your voice. You're going to have a long career, Maria. We need to protect that instrument." The video from the gala had been viewed over 5 million times. Maria received messages from people all over the world. A woman in Japan said the performance had inspired her to start singing again after 20 years. A man in Brazil said he'd played it for his mother in the hospital, and she'd smiled for the first time in weeks. A teenager in Ohio said it made her believe that dreams could come true at any age. Maria's first official concert with the symphony was scheduled for late spring. As the date approached, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves. But it was different now. She wasn't afraid of being invisible anymore. She was afraid of letting people down, of not living up to what they expected. The night of the concert, Elena helped her get ready backstage. Maria wore a professional concert gown this time, deep emerald green, purchased with her first paycheck as a soloist. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. "You ready, Mom?" Elena asked. Maria thought about that question. Was she ready? She was 43 years old, starting a career most people began in their 20s. She was competing with singers who'd trained at prestigious conservatories while she'd learned from YouTube videos. She still sometimes felt like an imposter, like someone would figure out she didn't really belong. But then she remembered standing on that stage at the gala, singing her first note, and feeling the room go still. She remembered the years of secret practice, the passion that had never died even when she'd tried to bury it. She remembered her 16-year-old self in Mexico, singing without fear or doubt. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." The concert was a triumph. Maria performed 2 arias, and the audience's response was electric. Standing ovations, flowers thrown onto the stage, calls for an encore. Afterwards, people lined up to meet her, to thank her, to tell her how her music had moved them. But the moment Maria treasured most came later, after the crowd had dispersed. She walked onto the empty stage one last time that night, just as she'd done for so many years. But this time, Elena was with her. "You know what's funny?" Maria said, looking out at the vacant seats. "I used to sing here when nobody was watching, pretending I had an audience. Now I have audiences, and sometimes I miss those quiet nights. Just me and the music." "You can still have both," Elena said. "You can perform for thousands and still sing for yourself." Maria smiled. Her daughter was right. Success hadn't taken away her love of singing. If anything, it had deepened it. Now she sang not just from passion, but from gratitude, from joy, from a place of finally being seen and heard. Over the next year, Maria's career blossomed in ways she'd never imagined. She performed with opera companies in 3 different cities. She was invited to sing at a prestigious music festival in Europe. A record label offered her a contract to record an album of Spanish and Latin American songs. The girl who'd sung at village festivals in Mexico was now singing on international stages. But she never forgot where she'd come from. She still visited the concert hall regularly, though now she walked through the front entrance as a performer, not the back entrance as staff. She made a point of learning the names of every cleaner, every maintenance worker, every person who made the building run. She started a scholarship fund for aspiring singers who couldn't afford formal training. She gave free workshops in community centers, teaching people that it was never too late to pursue a dream. She told her story over and over, not to brag, but to remind others that talent and worth weren't determined by job titles or bank accounts. 3 years after that gala night, Maria stood backstage at the concert hall before another performance. Through the curtain, she could hear the audience filling the seats. 2,000 people, just like that first night. But so much had changed. Elena appeared beside her, now working as the symphony's marketing coordinator. "Full house tonight, Mom. They're all here for you." Maria took a deep breath. She thought about all the nights she'd stood on that stage alone, singing to shadows, never imagining anyone would actually listen. She thought about the fear and doubt that had kept her hidden for so long. And she thought about the single moment of courage that had changed everything. The house lights dimmed. It was time. Maria walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. She smiled at the audience, at all those faces waiting to hear her sing. And as the first notes of music filled the air, Maria did what she'd always done, what she'd always loved. She opened her mouth and let her voice soar, no longer invisible, no longer silent, finally and completely free.